Now that sound never gets old. Well folks, it's finally here. Winter has come with its snow and chill, and what better way to receive the season than sit down, make yourself a cup of tea, and play some video games. I'm quite certain that all of us have certain games that kind of remind us of winter or of a certain time of the year, be it Christmas or whatever time of the year we might have gotten them. And there are several games that I remember very fondly, and in connection with them, I remember winter. So whenever it gets cold and chilly, I like to pop these games in and give them a whirl. The first of which is Popeye. Now, one of my earliest memories of playing video games was playing Popeye, one of those cold and dark days in which you don't see very far outside your window and there's snow on the ground. I remember my cousins had a ColecoVision and they would play Popeye for hours on end. And this is one of those early arcade games in the style of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. Actually, it's one of my favorite arcade games of that time. It only has 3 levels, but it's one of those games that you play simply because it's fun. There's no great achievement into beating the game since it only has 3 levels. And it's one of those games that you remember fondly years after you played it, and you go back to it once in a while. Popeye happens to be my favorite old school cartoon. I would watch Popeye episodes and look forward to them every Saturday morning. There were several incarnations. There were the old 1930s one. There was New Adventures of Popeye, which I enjoyed also. And one in particular that I had not seen in a long time is Popeye and Son, which was made in the 1980s if I'm not mistaken, and which has him living in Connecticut with Olive and his son Junior. He's such a multifaceted character, and well, like many other characters in the 1930s, you can pretty much put him in any setting because he's very malleable. Now the objective in Popeye is to grab all the objects that Olive throws at you, be it hearts, musical notes, or letters, as in the 3rd level, and rescue her from Bluto, who is just bumbling around there. And there are several objects in the stage which will aid you, such as an upside down basket, which you can pop onto his head, and of course, Popeye's signature secret weapon, spinach. Another game that I remember very fondly, and whenever I play it, I think of cold, I think of winter, is Kid Icarus. I remember getting this game, let's see, I got this game rather late, so it might have been 1990 or 1991 when I got this game, and it was very cold and windy outside. And I remember we put this game in and started playing, and the first level automatically made me think about darkness and how sterile it was outside versus how warm and welcoming it was inside. Now I'm playing the second world of Kid Icarus because it is the level that most reminds me of my old living room in my old house in Okinawa, where me and my parents used to live. Just playing this game and looking at the little rivers and palm trees makes me remember even the scent of my old house. Kid Icarus was also the first game that introduced me to the password feature, which I had no idea to that point, that you could actually continue your game from a level you have already played. To that point I took it for granted that every NES game, once you died or you wanted to play again, you had to start from the beginning. So you can imagine my surprise to find out that you could actually punch in a code and continue where you left off the previous time you were playing. The entire world of Kid Icarus is very particular as it mixes Greek mythology with a little bit of Christianity, with a little bit of its own particular flavor, and it's one of those games that I would have liked to see fleshed out a little more. Fortunately, they gave us a new installment on the Nintendo 3DS recently, and it looks like it's going in the right direction. It's such a rich and unexplored game that, if done properly, could be made into a very, very memorable series. And speaking of very memorable series, this game's sibling, Metroid, which was built with the same engine and was also released on the same day, is also one of my most loved games of all time. Metroid is a game that I love to no end, and I played this game probably more than any other NES game that I had. And it's one of those few games that even if I played it all day, I can sit down and play it. And after I finish it, I can pick up and play it again, right from the beginning. Because that's just how fun it is. The setting of Metroid is super stylish and very unique. It has its own particular flavor. And I think one of the benefits of this game is that it uses a black background. So you actually feel like you're in this cavernous world of Planet Zebes, alone and isolated from any safety. It helps immensely to create atmosphere, and this is one of the most atmospheric games that I can think of. And considering it was done on a little 8-bit machine, it's quite an achievement. Metroid holds a very special place to me because it was a game that I got. It must have been at some bargain bin somewhere, and must have been very cheap because I remember my grandmother got this for me because the cover looks pretty good. And of course the cover art does look amazing. It has a picture of Samus there and looking all menacing in her power suit. So she picked it up, and I had not actually heard about this game at that point. It was a completely blind purchase, so to say, or a blind gift, as you will. So I put it in, and immediately that became my new obsession. Now, most people would point to Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo/Super Famicom as the best Metroid title ever made, and that's perfectly understandable. But personally, I hold this game very dear, and this is my favorite Metroid, bar none. And yes, those of you who wondered if there are actually people out there who prefer the first Metroid to Super Metroid, well, here's one of them. The way I see it, Super Metroid is more of a time investment, and you have to sit down and play it and actually get invested into it, otherwise you won't really enjoy it. But Metroid is more of a pick up and play game, and even though this is a rather complex game and you have to find items and whatnot, it's just easier to pick up and play and start enjoying. And whenever I feel like playing Metroid, I find myself playing this game more than any other title in the series. Samus Aran's first adventure into Planet Zebes was also my first adventure into this planet and my introduction to the series. And as they say, you never forget your first. Now I was a little older, I was 14 years old, thereabout, when I was introduced to another game which is also a first in the series, and my personal favorite of the series, and that is Sakura Wars, or Sakura Taisen. Sakura Wars is difficult to define because it's a mixture of several kinds of games. It's a strategy game in the vein of Fire Emblem and Shining Force, but it also incorporates dating sim elements and visual novel and social interaction elements. So it's a very unique and particular game that had not been done in the same way since, and was something new and fresh that they were experimenting with. And in fact, Sakura Wars was so popular in Japan that they even had live shows. And up until recently, there was a Sakura Wars shop at which you can buy all their related items and collectibles. So it has a pretty strong following, or it had a pretty strong following at a time. And there are lots of Sakura Wars fans out there, myself included. I'm one of the biggest Sakura Wars fans that I know of. And it goes to show that when you put your mind into something creative so that your fans can enjoy it, you will always have a good response. Now, I vividly remember the time in which I got this game. It was a cold and very rainy day. It started out kind of cloudy and we were shopping downtown. And towards about mid-morning it started to pour and the rain just flooded the streets like nobody's business. So we had to wait inside and browse the shops while the traffic and all this water cleared off the streets. And I happened to see this at the game shop, and I was pretty interested. It had the Sega logo on it, so I immediately knew that it was worth my time. And boy, it was really worth my time. Whenever I think of Sakura Wars, I think of tea and rain, because it was a very rainy day when I started playing this, and I had made myself a cup of tea and sat down in the living room to play. And I don't remember the exact reason, but for the most part I was alone in the house, so I could pretty much have the place to myself. I remember playing through the first 2 chapters of this and becoming so enamored with the setting and the characters and everything that it just became immediately my new obsession, as with Metroid before it. I think what really makes this game is the characters. Each one has a very distinct personality. And you'll have several of the, I wouldn't say stereotypes, but sort of the categories of characters. You have the kind of rural, kind girl that is Sakura Shinguji. You have the high-flying, pompous girl that is Sumire Kanzaki. You have the small girlish character, which is Aidusu Chateaubriand. There's the awkward sort of nerdy girl, which is Koran Lee. And my personal favorite character in this series is Kirishima Kana, who is Okinawan, so is actually my compatriot, and it brought me warm feelings and warm memories of Okinawa when I was playing this game and interacting with Kana-san. Another game that I particularly enjoyed, and I still enjoy to this day, and will go back to no matter how many times I beat it, is Panzer Dragoon 2. And I mentioned this before in a previous video. Panzer Dragoon 2 is one of the most important games in my life because it actually inspired me to become a writer. And episode 2 of Panzer Dragoon 2 is by far my favorite video game moment, pretty much of all time. Running through this canyon and shooting things, and when your little dragon reaches the end of the canyon and it's a dead end with a sheer cliff, he takes courage and just spreads his wings and flies. This game, this level, and this entire setting is one of the best examples that I can think of the medium rendered as art, pure unadulterated art. Now, I remember seeing this game for the first time on a television program that was called Cybernet, and many of you might remember if you live in the United Kingdom or in Spain. And Cybernet was a show that was hosted by a lady called Lucy Longhurst, and when I saw the first screens of Panzer Dragoon 2, I was blown away. And a few weeks later I had this game in my hand and I could not wait to get home and play it. And this game not only met my expectations, it exceeded them with flying colors. I remember I got this game in mid-July, and in the southern hemisphere, July is the bleakest month of the year, when the cold winds come and the cold drizzle, and you can feel it to the bone. And it was one of those days that just chilled you right to the bone marrow when I sat down in my warm living room and fired up this game. And this is by far, easily my favorite Panzer Dragoon title. The first Panzer Dragoon had a very surreal and sort of dreamlike state. It was kind of like living in a fantasy. Panzer Dragoon 2 tightened it up, and this game's a lot more fast-paced than the first Panzer Dragoon. It requires a lot more split-second timing and avoiding and dodging. And it takes a lot of practice to get really good at this game, which, at the time, I had plenty of time to practice. I would get rid of my homework early and sit down and fire up this game. So whenever it's raining outside or there's a little drizzle, I always have the sound of the Ice Sea, which is one of the later levels in this game. That theme song just plays in my mind non-stop. The bleak post-apocalyptic setting of this game, plus all the machinery and the scenery, it just has a very particular style of its own. It speaks of a ruined civilization that's slowly trying to gain power again, and there's really no easy way to explain exactly why Panzer Dragoon is so amazing. You really have to just experience it on your own and feel that surreal, dreamlike state that you get when you play these games. It's truly a work of art with no equal. The last game I'm going to talk about is Xenogears. And as a lot of you may know, I did not get the PlayStation when it came out because I was not really interested in it. I got a little bit late, and I got it in 1998 when Tail Concerto came out, which is one of my favorite games on the system. And there was such an abundance of role-playing games, RPGs, on the system. One of them in particular caught my attention, and it was Xenogears. As you might have guessed, it caught my attention because it had a tremendously large robot in the front. And giant robots are just right up my alley. Anything with giant robots in it, I will most likely play it. Xenogears is a very particular game because it has a very unique style in which you're a 2D sprite moving in a 3D environment which is totally rotatable, and it gives you a sort of feeling of combining what was 2D and 3D, and I had not seen too many games like this made since. The battle system and the scenery and the environments all had their very particular feel, and little did I know that several years later, the same people behind Xenogears, or most of them, would go on to produce Sands of Destruction, which is from Sega, one of my favorite RPGs on the Nintendo DS. And if you play Xenogears and you play Sands of Destruction, you will immediately make the connection. It's the same style of battle, almost the same style of gameplay, and the 2D sprites against 3D environments, it just speaks of the creators of Xenogears and Sands of Destruction. I remember playing Xenogears deep into the night, and at the time I had a very small television set which I placed on my desk, and I had my PlayStation beside that. And it was one of those cold nights in which the drafts of wind came in from beneath the door and through the cracks of the window, so I actually covered myself up with a quilt. I was playing Xenogears, and who knows how many hours I was sitting there, because you just get lost in this game. It's just that good. And one thing that I like about this game is the pseudo-Germanic sort of influence of certain characters. And there was a time in Japan in which Germanic culture and sort of the Anglo-Saxon culture was kind of hip. So many characters and many comics had that sort of Germanic vibe to it. I'd say around the mid-90s to late 90s. Perhaps the legacy of Xenogears is more impressive than anything else. The author of Xenogears, the main man behind it, then went out to produce Xenosaga, which I had not had the chance to play Xenosaga yet, but I definitely must do that at some point. And of course, Xenoblade for the Nintendo Wii, which is easily one of the best games ever made, not just in this past generation, but of all time, one of the best games, most creative, most expansive, and just most engrossing adventures ever made. And apparently they're going to continue their legacy because Monolith Software showed us a trailer a few months back for a new project which I immediately thought Xenogears because it has a spray-painted X on the title screen. But yes, this is one of those games that you go back to. Maybe you play it after 2 or 3 years and you go back to it again. And it brings fond memories of the time in which you had less worries and you just had to deal with your homework and get good grades at school. And it goes beyond just being a video game. It becomes sort of like a time capsule or a snapshot in time, so to say. And all these games do that. All these games have feelings attached to them that you really can't buy that sort of feeling. Something that you make yourself and something that you relate through your experience with said games. And with this I bid you good night, and if you're in the northern hemisphere and it's cold and it's rainy outside or snowing, why not make yourself a cup of tea or hot chocolate or whatever you like to drink, and sit down and play some of your old video games. We only live once, so might as well enjoy it while we can. So that'll be all for tonight. Thank you for joining me, and happy winter, everyone.